Maple swallows up the flaxen. A four-drawer dresser on top, an ashtray houses a watch, spare change, collar stays, Knights of Columbus tie clasp. A clothes tree models a double-breasted suit jacket, pants neatly folded over the arm. An attendant valet. A pair of cordovans polished, washing saffron, maize, and goldenrod walls. Through its vanity's trifold, a sterling silver hairbrush monogrammed, a hand mirror bisects a yawning tortoise-shelled jewelry box, spawning a pearl necklace. Poppy glosses the original oak floors, tossed from beneath a smothering area rug. Reclining, her firm hits mold the mattress, the breeze of a slip running up her thighs, knees spent. A Sunday slides up its hands where desire cannot be shielded. This is a poem that I wrote in my book, Haitian Mud Pies and Other Poems. The title of the poem is The Nothing That Is There, and it's dedicated to the painting Sun in an Open Room by Edward Hopper. Good evening. My name is Charles Carr, and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry, a collaborative program between the Moonstone Art Center of Philadelphia and Philly Camp. The focus of our show is to give our audiences an experience of the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia, and to let our viewers know that in Philadelphia there's many different venues where you can hear poetry and hear poets, whether they're workshops, other people have open readings, poetry events. There are journals that are published in the city of Philadelphia. Moonstone itself publishes books of poetry books of all sorts. So on any given day in Philadelphia, there's being poetry performed. So tonight, really looking back on the poetry I read, that was a poem about a piece of art. And so we're kind of going on a little bit of reverse order. This is artists who happen to also be poets, and some of them are multifaceted artists. So I wanted to introduce them. They're remarkable painters as well as poets. First to my right is Catherine. I call her Kitty Bancroft. Kitty is an artist and writer, as shown at Muse Gallery, 3rd Street Gallery, Off the Wall Gallery, the Sketch Club, Fireworks Gallery, and the Mainline Art Center, among other places. Kitty works in collage, altered books, acrylic, and mixed media. Her current Ellis Island series is a Conte crayon and acrylic, was inspired by photographs of early 20th century immigrants. Kitty has written books reviews for the Philadelphia Inquirer, co-written 2 children's books, Felix Hat and that Philomena by Simon & Schuster, and has read her poetry at the Green Line Cafe, the Philadelphia Poetry Fest, the Last Word Bookshop, and other venues. And next to her is Peter Baroth. Peter is a writer, visual artist, musician, and staff member of the Philadelphia Stories magazine. And he lives in Media, Pennsylvania with his partner poet, who is here tonight, and Professor Courtney Bambrick. Peter's recent full-length book of poetry is Lost Autographs by Moonstone Press, and his novel is Long Green, published by iUniverse. Peter's work has appeared in journals such as the Mad Poets Review, Apiary, the Schuylkill Valley Journal, and Philadelphia Poets, where he has won both the Amy Trish Needle and Petrarca Family Awards. Peter's paintings have appeared in such venues as the Imperfect Gallery, Our Gallery, and the Wayne Arts Center. He is also a bass player and co-songwriter for the band The Party Crashers, whose music has been streamed on Sirius XM Goldie's Garage. That's something that I did not know. And last, surely but not least, is Deborah Fries. Deborah is a poet, writer, and printmaker whose work reflects her interest in landscapes, the environment, narrative medicine, and women's issues. Deborah is the author of 2 books of poetry published by Core Press in Tucson. Deborah has been the recipient of numerous poetry awards, including the Core Press First Book Award, the Sandy Crimmins Poetry Prize, the Montgomery County Poet Laureateship, and several narrative medicine prizes. Deborah works and exhibits her painterly monotypes at the 705 West Print Shop and Gallery in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. So welcome to you all. So I just want to read off or lead off our discussion with a quote from all places of Horace, and who actually said, you know, poetry is art and art is poetry, painting as the poem. So I throw that open to a discussion in terms of how those two things really come together, or are they very separate? And I'll start with Kitty.
A large question. Well, I was just reading another classical author who said poetry is eloquent painting and painting is silent poetry. And I think that sort of fits my experience. I don't know, this question is so large that I'm not sure I can talk about my own personal experience, which is that I see so many similarities doing each of them, which is kind of shocking to me. The process of trying to do each one, I seem to hit the same kinds of obstacles, have to solve similar problems. For example, letting go of too much. The need to distill and to be selective seems to operate in the same way in both. But that's not really answering your question. I guess what I find stimulating about doing both of them is how one is so much more involves the body and movement. In the case of painting, that it seems to come from the body more directly than poetry does. It sort of skips the head, although the head obviously gets involved. And I think that's what has drawn me to it in this kind of later part of my life, because it's almost like a way of returning to a sort of childhood directness of perception and expression. And often I find that something that I can't do in a poem, I can find a way towards if I'm working in a visual medium. So, but I think I'm daunted by the question.
I think the quote that you had actually was a quote that was in Plutarch, and it read, "Poema pictura loquens, pictura poem silens." Poetry is a speaking picture, painting a silent poetry. So, Peter?
Well, many people blend or mix their media, and they find that some of the poetry goes into their painting as imagery, and vice versa. And I don't tend to do that. I tend to be more of a purist. If I'm painting, I'll stick to the do's and don'ts of pure painters. And if I'm writing poetry and I'm putting together a poem, I tend to do that kind of purely as well. I think almost there's a kind of an analogy between digital and analog. And writing is ultimately digital in the way that words and letters are binary. And you either have a letter or you don't have a letter or a word, or don't have a word. And painting is more analog. You can blend colors infinitely. You can go from red to orange as a whole spectrum that's smooth and infinite. Therefore, it's kind of more analog oriented.
Deborah?
For me, I think that they both involve a similar kind of sensibility of composition. A little bit of red, big space of gray. There's something satisfying about being able to organize images, media, words in ways that are balanced and pleasing. You know, you have a monostitch maybe that goes on and on and on and then has a powerful ending, which is not unlike doing artwork where you have that mostly black and gray piece, and then there's this blue splotch at the end. So I think, to me, they come from the same place that wants to organize things, wants to compose.
Mhm. So, I mean, you have these two lives, and obviously, Peter, you have three lives. And that's because I've heard you read many times, and I really do see the link between especially music and jazz music, especially. But going back to that original question is that you have these two lives, essentially, these two wonderful streams. That, as far as a discipline, do you say, well, today I'm going to do this, or for this specific amount of time I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to concentrate on my poetry? Or is it really kind of random, really the inspiration or something that takes you and you say, well, for a week I'm going to be painting and I probably won't visit a poem? So how does your discipline organized?
Well, I do well with structure, which it's taken me a lifetime to learn. So I've structured my life so that I'm in a poetry workshop, as you know, that meets once a week, and in an art workshop that meets once a week. And that ensures that I will keep both of those things alive, and deadlines. So it's sort of a horrible thing to confess how much outside things need, but it's what I've learned about myself. So I would be doing it if I didn't have those deadlines and structures, but I might not complete anything because I would get stuck in thinking everything wasn't quite as good as it should be. And so for me, it's really useful to have a deadline and also a group, the stimulation of that. So for me, I'm keeping both going through these structures.
That's remarkable. I didn't know that.
To answer the same question, I think I'm different from Kitty, I think, in a way, in that a certain amount of escapism is involved for me, and it's not as structured. That's the difference, I would say. When I've written a long time, and there's a joy in structuring something from the kind of the Dionysian first draft to the Apollonian putting assembly of the revision. There's a great glory in that. But sometimes I can do that and have my fill of it, and then it's time to get into painting and get into that free-flowing, non-verbal space that I have, and I have pursued that very happily for many years now. I'm taking a course at Wayne Art Center with Michael Doyle, and I've escaped into that realm for quite a while. Just now, over the break, I'm getting back into more writing, and that's another escape for me.
Deborah?
I think the concepts of escape and play are really important for why we do what we do. As a 17-year-old undergrad, I was majoring in art, and I could not make my hands execute what my mind had imagined this thing would look like. And I tried for a couple of years to be an art major, and then I switched to English because it was something that you could edit and revise, and because I spent a life earning money as a writer, that had to be just right. And so art became a form of play. It was where I was not going to be invested in the outcome. I was just going to enjoy it. And I did that for many years, probably since I moved to Philadelphia. Art was a playful thing, and now I'm having my second solo show, and so it's starting to take on a little bit of the seriousness that writing once had. I pay for studio time every month, and so that gives me the deadline that Catherine was talking about. And now writing has become more of the treat. I think it's hard to balance having the energy and the impetus for both. But it's nice to be able to bring a sense of play to both.
Does the things that are that are topics of your poems, does that kind of bleed into your artwork, or, my poems are dealing with this and my art is pretty much separate? Is there a connection between those two for you?
I think the connection is in the feelings, the sensibility of being kind of serious and observant and not really edgy, just kind of approaching edgy, but not in the actual literal translation of one to the other. I've tried that. I wrote a poem and now I'm going to do a print that is the illustration of that, and it always falls flat. But the feelings can sort of be identified in both.
How about you, Peter? I would also ask you, because you're a poet, but you're also a musician, how they all blend together to bleed into your painting.
Well, I think, I was going to say relate my poetry to music, because I actually studied the cello for about 8 years back when I was before I went to college. And this was in Oklahoma, where I was an all-state cellist. And there is a definite connection between music and my writing. Music was where I first engaged with the idea of virtuosity. And I think that's something that I find in my writing, not necessarily the first draft, but as I developed into revision. Painting is kind of this nonverbal, almost spilling out of the unconscious kind of a world. And I think all of my experience, maybe out of everything, it's the engagement of the most of my experience into one statement. Whereas the poetry and the music seem to be kind of related in a little bit more confined area.
How about you, Kitty?
I think it's interesting. A poem that I'm planning to read is kind of the story of a theme that I noticed ran through both things that I was completely unconscious of. So I think there is a way that something expresses itself in both realms. I don't consciously do it, a little bit like Deborah. When I've tried to do it, it's felt awkward. So I feel like when it happens organically, it's exciting, and I'll go with that. But if I try and do it, I think one side or the other feels forced. But I'm still hoping, because it would be a wonderful thing to do.
Well, reading your biography and also actually going to one of your shows with this theme of immigrants, which is for you. I mean, is there the poetry that comes out of that, that study and that revelation of what life was like that, as well as the visual expression of that? Do they intersect? I've kept hoping maybe they would,
but so far, it's very close to my heart, the issue of immigration in general, what's going on in this country. But so I've sort of, and it comes into my poems, but not in the same form that it comes into the paintings. So, not so far.
Have you seen any evidence? Myself, I haven't. Any evidence of where there is this fusion of the word, actually in art? I know people that have had, I've seen shadow boxes with poems in them, but that might be a little different. Have you seen evidence of this where poetry is actually part of the painting?
Well, one thing I can say that I did early on, one of the first things I did when I kind of returned to art, which was about 12 years ago, was collage and altered books. And altered books, that was a very exciting thing for me, because I'd been a graduate student, I'd been a teacher most of my life, and then a graduate student, and was quite academic in some ways, a book reviewer. So to actually desecrate a book, to cut it up and make it into what I wanted it to be, to add images where they weren't, and create this whole form that hadn't existed before, that was a very big thing for me. And it kind of, because I think I'd been too much the good girl and the studious student. So, and I think that's one of the reasons painting was good. Also, it took me out of that analytical world completely.
Yeah.
Um,
How did that work when you say altered books? Can you help me visualize that?
Well, so in the case of what I first did, it was a book that I'd found they were discarding from the library. It was a wonderful old book about roses that someone had written in the early 20th century. And it was in very old-fashioned language, very flowery. I don't know why it appealed to me, but I suddenly found these poems coming out of me about roses, about manure, about all the things that you do to grow a rose. And then I started making collages that had to do with flowers, and then using some of the words that were in the book, but only, you know, the way people do cut poems. Or so I kind of made the words of the book serve my purposes. So that in that case, so the book still is a book, and you can open it, but you can only open to certain pages, and there are things that I've put in it, and things I've cut out of it, and things I've covered up, and so.
Wonderful. Have you seen these collaborations, you know, visually, and would you have any interest as an artist of, you know, kind of actually bringing them together in one of your works of art?
I've signed my name on some of my paintings, so that's maybe sometimes I think as visual as I get.
Yeah.
I think, you know, as I said before, there's kind of a sense of purity with my painting. When I'm painting, I'm kind of following the rules from anywhere from the old masters to the, you know, to Picasso and Braque, or whatever, however far out I go. And there's not too much interaction. I did paint a picture of the American pro soccer player Eddie Johnson, and in the background I did put some posters that you'll see like around a soccer stadium during a game. I had a teacher my freshman year in college who loved Duchamp and loved a lot of the experimental writers and artists of the first part of the 20th century. And I liked her a lot, but I found myself kind of muddled between verbal and the visual in that case. So maybe a mongrel in many ways, but a purist when it comes to painting.
Do you see collaborations? Is there is that something you would?
Yeah, absolutely. I did some collage in the last year that I was trying to recycle things in my house. I took old linen postcards and started tearing them up, and some onion skin paper letters, and I did this on top of old prints that were kind of unsuccessful. And I really got into it. And I can see myself doing that more. I think the first time I was inspired by words and images was at the Minnesota Center for Book Arts. And I've been kind of following book arts for a while. People do very interesting things with type and images, a lot of collage going on there. But yeah, I think there are times, especially in critical times like we're living in, where you just want to stamp a word on top of something that you've made.
In these two avenues, or in these two parts of you, are you more innovative and experimental with one as opposed to the other, as far as form or, you know, content? I mean, how?
Yeah, absolutely. Writing, being a poet, is a lonely thing to do. And when I work in the studio in Jenkintown, there are always 5 or 6 other people there working when I'm working. And there's this openness to the collaboration of what medium are they? Oh, there's somebody doing a rust print. There's somebody doing a collograph. And it just loosens you up and opens you to the idea of experimenting, because you have this contact with other people, not because you're going to a reading and hearing something and thinking, oh, well, I like the way he did that. It's more like an immersion in experimentation, and the idea that even if you screw something up, you can probably save it. You can come back and print on top of it. So, yeah, it's hard to feel that freedom in my writing.
Okay. How about you, Peter, in terms of experimentation?
I think that both my painting and my writing are homages in a way. And in that way, it somewhat limits me in terms of my experimentation. I'm more conservative than my partner Courtney is, for example. I look back to the 50s, I look back to the beats, I look back to things that have been established. And whereas I reach out, maybe in one facet, I'll go back 2 steps, to get to the, it's almost a legal term of kind of getting to precedent. Before I move on into the unknown. So maybe bold, but not as freely experimental and frontier pushing as you might think.
Okay. How about you, Kitty?
Well, I'm interested how I seem to be going in the same, moving in both realms to experiment more and more. And this is where I regret my age, because there's so much more I want to do, and I can really see something developing. So I've just got to stay another couple of decades to try things out, because it takes a while to feel confident enough to do things the way you really intuitively want to do them, and get the skills to depart from what you think you should do or what has worked before. Or it takes, I don't know. So I'm just, I feel like in both, it's kind of comparable in both realms, that I'm getting more experimental. It may not look that way or sound that way,
Right.
but I can recognize it in terms of how I've taken a different kind of risk.
So you really dedicate. I really want to push. You want to push on that, and you're not staying pat. This is my, this is what's successful for me in painting. This is what's successful for me in poetry. I'm just going to hang with that and ride that.
I mean, that would be tempting if I thought there was a lot of success, but that would also be boring.
Great.
So,
Well, this is wonderful. Well, I mean, tonight we really get an opportunity to listen to you read some of your poems. So that's where I would like to start now, and I'll start with Kitty.
okay. Well, the first poem I'm going to read is, it was really obvious that this was an appropriate one to bring. I only wrote it recently, and it's kind of telling the story of how I began doing art. Story about egg. Oh, sorry, and I'll just say this also is what I was referring to, where I discovered afterward how much of a theme there was and how it connected to my life in ways I was not conscious of. Okay, story about egg. The fact is, I began to make and to write for real when my children left home and my eggs began to dwindle, and in other words, came late. There's not much time left now. To run, to make, to write. My hair late to turn gray, as I am late in everything. Is beginning now to turn 14 years after I started, when I'm beginning only now to know how to finish things. I start. Just in time, you could say, my memory for names leaching into the background wall, as I know finally what I should call, by name, who I am now and what I make. So I Xeroxed them, the eggs, put them in an egg cup, framed them, made a face out of the egg slicer. I took with me, from the group house where I met my husband, a roommate who arrived. Its patent number, like his, affecting me. He was young. The executioner's boast about metal is, I'll kill you quick. I'll egg slice you thin. I can make you into pieces, even and trim. Art is wild. I sent out pictures to a wall. At once they paraded every month down tubes, hoping to meet someone to be bought. I wrote them too into poems. They melded with sperm and became my children. What else could I do? I was losing them. Knowing only now their magic, or so my unconscious demon said, the same one who lowered the goddess, the great egg of the world before me, in which we are white and yolk, lost and found, broken and whole, a shell and limestone in the garden. My father-in-law always said eggshells were what made his tomatoes grow. Red on the windowsill, like lips, like menstrual blood, the stain after 55 I did not find anymore. There is more you need to know. We who carry them, unknowing from the womb, and unknowing let them go, we know. So it is now, knowing the unknowing that I was before. I begin.
Oh, wow. What was the impetus? What was that drove you to that?
To write this?
Yeah.
I think it was just suddenly realizing, oh my God, it was when I was losing my eggs that I did all this art about eggs. You know, I had not put that together. And literally the very first piece of art that I showed anywhere was a Xerox of an egg in an egg cup in a frame so that it looked kind of like what should be on an altar. And I did a lot more with that also. Okay, this poem is about the painting workshop that I'm in. And one of the great pleasures for me in this stage of my life, I was a teacher, as I said, most of my life, both in different levels of in middle school, high school, and college. And it was such a relief at the point at which I found my teachers, who were Leonard Gontarek in poetry and Francine Shore in painting. Because there was a way, I was so ready to receive and not to be the one who knows. I didn't want to be the one who knows. I wanted to be the one who was learning. So this is a little portrait of a moment in the painting class. After. We watched the light end on the winter's day, the blue that comes faint and net-like. Yes, that's better, Susan said. Still the question of structure. I felt aware I did not know how to solve it, how she might make the center big enough, make it connect. When someone says of a painting, there, it's finished. Not finished, Francine corrects. Complete, she says, which means you can pluck it from the easel and stop. Fullness, the wished for. Finished, we do not know and never are. I had spent the whole class making corrections I had thought were small on a painting I thought already worked, so flirting with ruining it. Sometimes a skier has gone fast before, not this time, runs into an icy bank. Everyone else has gone home except me and Susan and Doris and Francine and Laurie and Deborah in the other room. Susan took her painting in to show Francine. Francine said, "Make it light in the center all the way up." Francine tends to be certain. I wasn't sure. Susan wasn't sure. Doris wasn't. Worth trying? Susan will have to figure it out, I think. Going out to the car, Laurie said, "I spent all the time on this one painting," pointing to the yellow canvas in her hand. "See, I added pencil lines." "I like them," I said. "At least all this time, I didn't think once about the school shooting," she said. It was still light out. "Have a good week," she said, going to her car. One of the great pleasures for me also, not only in being the student, but in the synergy of what I was learning from each teacher was extraordinary because, as I said earlier, one thing was the need to let go, to take out, to not have so much in, the importance of letting something speak by getting rid of extraneous detail. And that was true in both cases. I felt both teachers ended up showing me that, helping me become a better surgeon of my own work. And also having it's sort of what Deborah was talking about in terms of the community, having a community and other eyes and the help of your peers who are excited, doing different things, having problems, all of which become mirrors for you, inspiration, and then just a different eye looking at what you've done and saying, you know, I'm not sure you need that. So I'm about to read a poem about one of my favorite painters. It's really more about my father, but Matisse is the title. But I want to just say, this poem is an example of where Leonard Gontarek in his workshop can just say one thing and help bring something into focus. And that's an extraordinary quality, and a quality that I think certain mentors, certain editors have. It's rare, but he suggested, so I just want to kind of give, as they say, a shout out to Leonard, because this poem changed in form because of one suggestion he made. Matisse. A pile. I keep them in a box. Postcards, thick, good quality. A story told in lines, not sad, even though death is the end, they keep saying. We are lost, we are found. My father's gone. They are thick like cream, years after he loved them and never explained. When my father traveled to Europe, when my mother died, when he fled sorrow, when he bought into a group tour which he'd never done, he brought back note cards of one artist from one place, Vence. I found them in a bursting envelope after he died, a virgin mother and her child. Sketches untamed, smudged charcoal studies for windows, stained glass commissioned by a nun who'd been his model. Mother with her exuberant son, the son leaping. He fingered them while his fellow tourists shopped. He was touching her, them, the women who loved him, who let him leap as baby upon a knee. She, who had a dance, leapt in his eyes.
They were wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for the explanations about, workshops and how, how they really help you to mold and customize poems in a very different way. Peter?
Before I start into some of my poems, I want to mention Leonard McCarrick. I have studied with him, and as I have studied with J.C. Todd and Paul Martin. Those are some of my influences, not maybe in style, but certainly in structure. This first poem I'm going to read is called Blues for the Sidekick, and it's after Lamont Steptoe. The scene is a movie that took place in St. Louis or Cincinnati, a river city a shade north to be south. And it was a black guy who taught Dean Martin or Steve McQueen to shoot craps right, or to tempt women to sigh softly, or to feel the blues for real. Maybe it was a shoeshine guy with a PhD in street and mudhole and riverboat who could sing as sweetly as the Mills Brothers, and it was poignant because he would be the guy that lent the leading man's soul. Maybe blocked for Joe Namath and was glad to do it, because green-eyed Hungarians and soul brothers were often just about the same color. And there were places that the two could meet, smoky bars, the horse races. And because it was a movie, the end would feature the camera panning wide, with the white guy heading uptown or out to West County, and the black man heading for the damn river. And the music would always be something like Sinatra singing This Town, or else some Hugo Montenegro forgotten swinging track. Jimmy Smith and Wes Montgomery, perhaps. And though the black man had never been closer to Africa than Pittsburgh, he could take the credit for having baptized the white man in the waters not only of the Mississippi, but the darkest upriver of the Nile or the Zambezi or the Congo. The scene was America, of course, and it was a two-way deal of sorts, with a man who had next to nothing happy to help to save the situation, though the debutante wife back in the chandeliered manse in the heaven that was Shaker Heights or Ladue might never know his name. Strong African-American influence, and also movies from the mid to late 60s are influential. Florida. Some conversation among the night people triggered the memory, made me recall the sounds of choppers down the boulevard, the sickly warm breeze up from the beach, and the lines outside the nightclubs. An evening's thrill concocted out of hard cider and bathed in an Eddie Van Halen solo. Wasn't she there those years ago, this girl from the other night, the one with the garish blonde hair, taking part in a doomsday celebration out of a Hieronymus Bosch painting, satyrs chasing Amazons, philosophers shooting craps, students rioting for no other reason than the night was warm or the streets inviting, the morning spent in bed with nameless women, subtropical mayhem just around the corner, like the footfalls of a pimp scurrying indoors. The order that we go by seems so thin now, like it could crack apart at any moment, like some unfortunate store window, and we would all begin charging in for the stereos and the TV sets newly available, or lusting after suntanned women, Cuban women, African, in the motels and in the streets, driven on by jungle rhythms, while by the by ordering brightly colored drinks at the bar. Phosphorescent night's time delusions of a heady land glowing like signs on the main drag and driven by a rock star's wild abandon. If we listened to all the lyrics, we would know, wouldn't we, the glory and the gore of it, of things that almost happened and things that happened, running with the bulls of Pamplona or the girls from Tampa Bay. And tonight, the night people, they must be the right people, staring at the embers of an age lost and found, thinking about a bikini that came unstrung, about the garment that was cast away, about a girl who surrendered her top to the New Orleans night, thinking about the drawers kicked across the floor, about charging up the street like a fullback from the State University up the middle for a 5-yard gain, full of Mahler, the Rolling Stones, the Doors, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. This one's called Mort, a very interesting man I once met and knew quite well. Here it is, midnight at the old Bryn Mawr Dunkin' Donuts 20 years ago, the club. And here's Mort monologuing with slight irony and slight vocalese inflections. This man who has been everywhere and done everything, always working for the right cause, which is to say the left, because this land is yours too. A solo out of Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola recalls a Boston Brahmin background, Episcopal Academy near Philly, varsity soccer, the Oklahoma oil patch, Harvard College, Mississippi for civil rights during Freedom Summer, New Orleans with the Spartacist League, Penn Law. A break, one or a few, drying out in Baltimore. I think that's the right order. Some stuff spills into other stuff, the way certain vivid lives are conceived, a romance here, some aristocratic woman, a marriage, a son who he's devoted to, whose own marriage I once spied in the Times. Intergenerational hanging out is what he called it, these donut shop sessions. And I thought that I had been there and back. And like a strafed and wounded bomber returning from its run, Mort was coming in for a landing here and now. And yet there always hung the notion that somehow he might have lost. What is certain is that he had lived, and that will always trump the desk-bound among us. Tomorrow we'll be back to the pool maintenance or landscaping jobs we might have picked up here or there, the ones that do work anyhow.
We have time for one more.
Okay. Speaking of writing and painting, this touches on both in different ways. Philadelphia hipster. You stare at the bricks of the old bandstand in West Philly as gamble and huff daydreams drift in your mind like plastic bags in an aimless gusting wind. You said Kaddish when Eddie Fisher died. You have your favorite South Philly Italian bistro. Dick Clark, Dick Clark, Dick Clark. And it all went west then, like the sun, like death, a pebble tossed across against a window, boring a little hole, a slight perfection, finally shattering. You think of Joey Bishop cracking jokes on Federal, bound for the Borscht Belt. You die a little on that curve of Lincoln Drive where Teddy Pendergrass crashed. One day you hope to find the block where Cameo Parkway Records once reigned, signed Question Mark and the Mysterians and Bobby Rydell. The Hungarian restaurant on Sansom that closed down. Why? What do the Hungarians know that you don't? When to bail out? No, you don't know. You with your glib Buddhisms, your abstract art, your Coltrane LPs, and finally your survivor's mind. But hey, here comes a renaissance up Broad Street like a rusted, rattling yellow cab barely under control, like a gliding, barreling Philadelphia Flyer headed for the boards. Because you know what? You just sold your first painting.
Great. Deborah?
To take my glasses off, excuse me. This is funny. My first poem is dedicated to Leonard Tarek. This is Leonard's
I am
Love
going to
Fest.
charge
Love
Leonard
Fest.
for free advertisement tonight.
Yep.
I moved to Philadelphia in 1994, and before that I lived in Milwaukee. I worked in PR, and so I knew that from an advertising standpoint, Milwaukee was City 17 and Philadelphia was City 5. Emergence for Leonard Gontarek. That spring I moved from City 17 to City 5. I learned to lift my skirts, silently step around the huge pupa attached to sidewalk grates. Night placed some in front of Thomas Jefferson Hospital, face down, wrapped like cigars. Dusted in pollen, in daylight most would release the Jacob stones they'd slept on, give up the sewer's warm breath, push through a stampede of legs in blue scrubs, feel their newborn way into life at Market East. I'd be there, in line, at Aubon Payne, sometimes behind Terry Gross or Ramona Africa. Every sad and smart thing I needed to know in the new city was body close, pressed beneath Anita Baker Muzak, written in ink on strangers' arms. My ignorance was a Rottweiler with empty eyes leaning hard against my legs. Coming from City 17 to City 5, I needed the help of poets. Interpret this, I thought, releasing my gathered skirt. Tell me if what I feel when I step around their bodies is violet or visceral. Give me a greenish word for survival, some divination of detachment, some strong local antonym for Midwest, for squeamish, for being soft. I also have a Florida poem. It's that time of year. We think about warmer places. I think about them cautiously. When I was young, I read Dying in the Sun and still remember how fleets of metal angels, air ambulances, wait to carry parents through bouncy clouds and return them to Glenside, Glen Cove, Glendale, to transition. Who books a flight between their last Cubano and sweet tea, last Murex found at low tide, afternoon aqua size or bridge? Someone does. Someone says, bring her or take me home, and in that taking, neither healed nor saved, they are transported from their dream of pink stucco and palms to a practical place. Kid close, cold. Out the window, tiny snowfalls. Inside, your IV drips. It is unclear who wanted this final move, but here you are, replanted, as if Florida had been a long vacation. The next poems are about having visions. I have an upcoming show that combines printmaking and poems, and it's about having visions. This is
Can I stop you there? Can you
Sure.
tell us when that's happening? and
Why,
where
I
it's
sure can. I just happen to have the card with me. February 9th to March 29th at 705 West Gallery in Jenkintown.
happening? Great.
This one is called Abducted at the Wingstop. What happened, he said. You were in my rearview mirror, then gone. There are ways to explain my abduction. I could say that all the white cars parked like homebound sheep looked alike, that I stared at their rumps waiting for a tail to wag, or that the light reflecting off car chrome began to shimmer, to feather into living wings. Something took me for a moment, and in that taking, I was absent. I try to visualize the thing that took my father, to recognize its arrival. It might have been a light or a dark. It might have been a crushed mirror, wave of glass, or hairy mouthpiece that could flash hello from the brown eyes of a friend. It might be a single moment that replays, keeps me suspended in panic scan in a world of whiteness where only one unseen thing is different from the others. One more?
Yeah, time.
I should do my long one then, because it's got the biggest vision in it. This will be in an anthology coming out from terrain.org in March 2020 called Dear America, or Letters to America. I'm not sure what the final title is, but it was written following the election in 2016. Visions at the National Zoo. I am lost at the National Zoo this leafy, warm Thanksgiving weekend, somewhere near the bipedal red pandas whose wedding hat tails drape like wisteria from branches, just 2.6 miles from the White House kitchen garden, where puckered kale will soon freeze and curl. But closer, I think, to the source of sweet whiffs of straw and dung from another large species, which, even armed with prehistoric hide and horn, may also feel sad in this afternoon light. Despite swarms of polyglot children squealing, bay bay, soft wave of kids licking the glass, short slice of the 2.5 million visitors who've come to your zoo this year, even on election day, when I was in a Philadelphia suburb, twitchy from the swing state full court press, but not lost like now. Skirting small mammals, searching for the think tank, wanting to see Botanicus, her new son, red, glimpse Daddy Kyle brachiating overhead, oranges, acid mine drainage, hoping that from his place in the sky, he might be able to see through the bamboo stands and light-wrapped trees, throngs of stroller pushers, zebra-stalking cheetahs, first date nuzzlers, and point me to a place beyond the screechy flamboyance of flamingos, higher, where I can see all 2016 zoo-goers at once, crowded against cages, spilling into the moats that separate us from beasts, and recount their sweet upturned faces, earnest otter eyes, extant and assembled, to picture them in some, plus 365,000 more, scared, sandwiched together on Lion Tiger Hill, rounded up with goats in the kids' farm corral, waving from the roof of the Great Cat's gift shop, who together are your lost citizens, the 2.8 million who each believed a vote was a voice that would be heard, each a peacock's scream or lioness's roar, soundstorm of animal certainty, derecho of deep human desire, so very sure our collective shout would have your impartial ear, rightly grab your untamed heart.
You know, Kitty, I think I shorted you maybe 2 minutes. Do you have another poem that you wanted to read?
I do have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. This is returns to the question of how to know when something's done, which is always a dilemma in a poem and always a dilemma in a painting. But this is a different context. Today only. Do you think that's done? Pointing to the red steak spitting on his new Japanese pan. I'm his mother, wholly grown. For me, all is easy, all is known. Pans virtually grow out of my hands. My mother's tongue intones, a minute or two more. It's rare what I know, it's well done. We eat it together sometimes, it burns. Even a new Japanese pan will rust when you're 28 and a man. A mother's mostly useless. A steak is often overpriced. Your mother was 40 when you were born. The best cuts are dear. Once you have to pay for them yourself, it will be soon. Get the plate ready. Today only, in the pretend kitchen in which counters don't stain, me in my apron, you with spatula in hand, and I know everything, and the sizzle is our friend, not a cow's scream. A planet we have a minute left to understand. It smells delicious. Take off the pan. It's almost done. We'll eat. You'll go. You see, this I know.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Kitty and Peter and Deborah. Before we, kind of sign off, Deborah gave us an announcement of, a upcoming show in February. Is there something that you want to tell our audience about something that's coming up with either venue, either your paintings or your poetry? Same to Peter, I would say 3 venues because you're a musician. So,
well, I do have a question. We had given some images. Have they been visible? Do you know to?
Well, I haven't
the
seen them on
audience?
that screen, but I understand that they were circling them on what people see at home.
Oh,
so.
okay. Right now, I'm on a show at Da Vinci Art Alliance, which is down in South Philadelphia, and that ends at the end of this month. I'm going to be in a mainline Arts Center show, member show, that begins next month. But otherwise, that's the main thing.
Great.
For now.
Peter?
I'm planning to submit to one of Moonstone's anthologies for writers who have performed for the year 2019, and I'm planning to submit and read at the upcoming anthology that their presentation they're going to be having.
Great. Wonderful. I want to thank you all. This is a terrific show, and I surely learned a lot, on both sides, on the poetry side and the painting side. So I thank you, each one of you, for being my guest tonight.
Thank you, Charles.
I want to say this about, this is the last show, not the final show for Moonstone. Philly Loves Poetry, anyway, for the year 2019. It's been a great year. It's our third year, and we're going to go into our fourth year come January. I want to say something about an initiative that we have. It started on Giving Tuesday. We sponsor a lot of readings for established poets and those that are on the rise, but we're very interested in the young voices of poets in Philadelphia. So we have this initiative that started on Giving Tuesday, where we're trying to raise funds for emerging poets, young voices, to find workshops where we would provide scholarships for them, where they could really grow and develop their art. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, and we encourage you to do that, you can go to www.moonstoneartscenter.com, and you can find out a way that you can participate and donate to this effort. The other initiative, we have books that we publish and that are for sale. And if you go to that same site, you will find about a lot of poems. We've now published 87 books, and that's in a very short amount of time, and we continue. And we really had some remarkable poets that have been published, and we publish these anthologies that are really terrific. So I appreciate everything that all my guests this year for 2019. They've really made Philly Loves Poetry a great thing, and manifest the very purpose of why we're having this is the rich culture of poetry in the city of Philadelphia. So I thank you, and I thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, thank you.